All right, let's get into our first debate then. And we're asking about Labour's plan to give all primary school children a free breakfast. We'd love to know what you think. So Labour wants every primary school to offer a free breakfast club. They say that it's going to save parents at least £400 a year and would also cut school absences. They want every child to have a nutritious breakfast regardless of their family income. But it means that the government would be paying for the children of wealthy families to eat breakfast, and critics question whether that's fair. Esther, where do you sit on this?
I don't have it in me I don't have the energy to be upset about giving children free food. Of course, if that's actually what we spent money on, I don't think the country would be in as dire a state. We waste money on far more inconsequential things. I do question, though, whether the food will be nutritious. I don't know the last time you went into a hospital, but if you see the vending machines and even the food that they serve in hospitals, NHS hospitals, they're very not nutritious at all. They're like anti-nutrition. So this idea that children will be getting a free breakfast, I do hope that it's nutritious at the very least. I do think that it could be a way to get people to especially parents, to get to know each other more and to be more involved in their children's lives if they have that kind of community feel, because it's a club, right? It's not just...
Not for the parents, though. It would be for the children.
Yeah, but the thing is, the parents, are they going to be gone, or...?
Yeah.
Oh, so you just leave the kids there. So you leave the kids earlier. So
I mean, they run these things at the moment, but mostly parents will pay into it. So I'm presuming it's for parents. I haven't got to this stage yet who start work much earlier and need.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that you shouldn't have kids if you can't afford them, yes, but I don't. Your financial situation as a parent doesn't stay static throughout your entire life. Of course, there are times where parents are more hard up than others. I just wonder, like, if the kids are not. Can't have breakfast. I'm assuming that the parents aren't eating either, because I think it's counter-instinctual to eat as a parent while your child is starving. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. So I'm assuming if the kids are not eating, therefore the parents are not eating, in which case we have a bigger problem of just people being unable to afford food.
Yes. So is the best way to counter that by paying for free breakfasts for all children? Is it something actually we can afford, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely something we can afford. I mean, I know the sort of policy won't say that actually it saves us more money than it costs because kids learn better at school, and if you've got kids with better grades, and then that's obviously very good for the economy. I think there's a couple of ways of looking at this. So on the one hand, you have a situation now, due to the cost of living crisis and the way that food has increased in costs especially, and that this can sort of tackle childhood malnutrition and make sure that kids can learn well at school. I'm also very much in favour, and I say this as someone who doesn't have children, of making having kids as easy as possible. And the reason I say that is because with more people choosing not to have kids, I'm very aware of the fact that, you know, my sister's got 2 kids, I don't. And she just incurs so many more costs than I do in life. It's so expensive to have children. So this idea, you might also be paying for middle-class parents to not have to feed their kids in the morning. Great. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. It's very expensive to have. I mean, ultimately, the responsibility of feeding your kids is on you. I get that. There's some responsibilities that you think, what are fundamental to being parents? My biggest issue, to be honest, is whether the food will be nutritious. And is this a standalone thing, or is this part of a wider public health policy approach? Because if you're going to say the state is going to start feeding people, albeit children, but I'm assuming at some point down the line they'll also take care of people that can't feed themselves, it shouldn't just be about putting food in people's mouths. Is the food nutritious? Is there a wider public health policy behind this?
Well, presumably the schools will be trying their utmost to pick the most nutritious cereals.
Yeah, but even our hospitals don't get it right.
And you're possibly right on that. I'm sure they try to. It's probably to do with budgets as well. So there you go. If we're not giving hospitals enough of a budget to provide nutritious meals, why on earth are we then providing them for schools? For example, when my son starts school, your taxes are going to be paying for my son to have breakfast. Do you think that that's a valid use of your money?
Yeah. To be honest, the amount of public waste the amount of things that the government wastes money on, I don't have the energy to be upset about feeding kids. It's just, there's so many things that the government wastes money on. I'm just thinking, if this could make it easier for parents to actually have kids and to encourage people to have kids, fine. I'm all for it. I think if we're talking about public waste, this doesn't really upset me.
Part of the criticism of this is that actually we're already providing free school meals, and free breakfast clubs are available to those that are on universal credit and already really struggling to feed their children. So actually, there's an argument to say that we're already providing what's needed, Michael, that this doesn't have to be rolled out to individuals like me, for example.
I suppose there's 2 ways of looking at it. Would it be an absolute catastrophe if we don't introduce this?
No.
Probably not, right? But is it a positive thing to introduce? I think absolutely. And I'm generally in favour of, where possible, where it's not sort of prohibitively expensive, to have universal well, this isn't even a benefit, but sort of universal provision, because what that means is you have working class kids and middle class kids socialising together.
Does it mean we have to start providing for the adults as well? Because Esther's brought up the fact that if the kids aren't eating, the parents probably aren't either.
Well, I think if we've got a society where people who are working full-time are struggling to buy food, then yes, we need to raise people's wages, right? I think there are lots of issues with generalised poverty in society. But obviously, I mean, the great thing about providing free school meals for young children is it's fairly cheap to do, and the positives are pretty much overwhelming.
You say it's fairly cheap. I honestly nearly fell off my chair when I read £400 a year. I thought, is that what I'm spending on cereal? Christopher from Kent, you're up first. What's your view when it comes to free school breakfasts for everyone?
Good morning, everybody. Well, personally, I don't think that they should be doing it. I think that it's just another abdication of parental responsibilities. You can go and get a bag of porridge oats for less than £1 in the supermarkets, and it will last for ages. Just add water and heat it up. I think actually, if they're going to spend the money, it would be better spent on educating parents how to do parenting, such as budgeting, cooking, making sure their children are toilet trained before they go to school.
Well,
I think that would be a better option.
That's a fair point.
Especially if you're going to put that money into teaching parents how to be parents.
Do you think that children are going to school not being fed and going to school not potty trained because parents don't know what they're supposed to be doing?
I think it's partly that, and also partly that they just are abdicating their responsibilities as parents.
I mean, I think a problem with this argument is that lots of people... So I think for a very long time, we as a society have said, look, if you want to have kids, you better make sure you can afford it. You better make sure that you can take all of these responsibilities. And to some degree, obviously, parents do need to take responsibility for their children. But lots of people, because I think society has been a bit harsh about this recently, have just said, fine, I won't have kids. And now what we've got is a situation where people aren't actually having enough kids. We're going to have a lot of old people very soon, and we're not going to have many young people soon to pay for their pensions.
The cost of feeding kids is high, but I think mainly people are not having kids because of housing. Now, I think being able to feed someone in your care is a fundamental responsibility. You wouldn't have a pet and not feed it and expect free pet meals. So that's a valid point. Like I said, I think the bigger concern here, whenever we talk about feeding anyone, is health. Is there a public health policy behind it? Now, people on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale are not starving. They're just eating poorer quality food. And that's the bigger problem.
But I think there is a health policy behind this. I think the idea, as Michael alluded to earlier, is that actually in the long term what you've got is less pressure on the NHS because you don't have any diseases associated with malnutrition. You have children with
But they still have 2 other meals a day.
Food education. Some of them are happening at school as well because these same children will probably have free school meals too. Christopher, I put to you though, you're saying that it's an abdication of parental responsibility, and let's say that you're right on that. Let's say every child that is turning up to school without a school meal is because their parents are just not taking the responsibility that they need to. Why should that child suffer because of that?
Well, I'm not saying that they should. This is where I would say put the money into actually teaching parenting skills.
But they're not going to do that anyway. They've abdicated responsibility. They're not interested. They've got mental health issues. Whatever the reason, they don't have time for their children. Should we punish the child for that? Should we let that child suffer, or do we give them the best start that they possibly could have?
Well, I mean, obviously you want to give people the best start they possibly can have, but I think there has to be some, you can't just keep having the state step in, for every time that the parents are, say, abdicating their responsibility.
But
something else has to be done about it, I think.
At the extreme ends, Christopher, the state does inevitably jump in. So maybe if it jumped in a bit earlier, it would be easier.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that it's a choice of where you spend that money, and I think and for the long term as well. I mean, I think that just throwing money alone at these things is not actually helping to solve the problem.
Also, I think there's a valid point about the social message this sends out. There was a time back in the day where not being able to feed your child would be a source of shame, right? Having to rely on the state to feed your child something as basic as breakfast would be a source of shame, and it would suggest that the parent is starving because I can't imagine a scenario where a parent is feeding themselves but their child is starving. So it would suggest that everyone in the household is not eating. So I think you can't remove it from the kind of social values you're inculcating. If you're not doing something, then the state will step in. This is is something as basic as feeding a child you chose to have. It's like you wouldn't have a pet and not feed them.
But when it comes to breakfast, I think it's slightly different in the
Why?
sense that if a parent has got a chaotic lifestyle, it might not be that they're not eating, they're just not eating that early in the morning. So they're not getting up in time to put that cereal on the table to get that child ready for school to be able to learn in the way that
perfectly
they
honest,
need to. So
I didn't really...
should that, at that point, the school step in?
I took on a lot of the eating habits of my parents, naturally, because I lived with them. I didn't really grow up eating breakfast very often, only once in a while, because my dad didn't really eat breakfast, but he would eat like sort of an early lunch or something like that, and that was fine by me. I don't know who would say, oh, it's child abuse to not feed them breakfast, but I don't necessarily think that, you know, altering the eating habits of your child to fit around their family, which most people do, is a bad thing.
OK, Christopher, thanks for your call. Diane from Northumberland, what's your view when it comes to free breakfast for all children? Do you think it's necessary? I mean, there'll be a lot of parents out there that don't necessarily need that.
Not all children, no. I did 30 years in school catering, and my last job was a junior school. Now, if a child had slept in and haven't had time for breakfast, the teacher, one of the teachers who took the younger children, she would send them down to the kitchen. And I always had the little cartons of milk that were left from the day before. I used to keep them in the fridge. They would have a carton of milk and some toast or cereal. But certainly not, I don't think Richie Sumac's children would need to have a free school meal.
No, and there'll be plenty of parents that don't think that they would need access to those kind of, I suppose, benefits.
Yes.
But Diane, I wonder whether you've touched on something here. Perhaps we don't need a policy like this rolled out. I wonder whether actually what we need is a common sense approach, which apparently is happening anyway in 40% of schools. They're already providing free school meals for those children that need it but don't qualify for free breakfast for those that don't qualify with the benefits, just out of sort of necessity. And I wonder whether that's maybe how we just have to go forward, that schools can identify the children that need the breakfast and do it subtly.
Yes, well, teachers do. They pick up on things. And I mean, especially the little ones, the little 4 or 5-year-olds, I think they would tell a teacher if they hadn't had their breakfast and they were hungry. If you have a good teacher, they just pick up on things like that.
Yeah. I suppose whether that will then single the children out that haven't had breakfast and from the children that have, whereas if all the children are just getting a breakfast or at least have access to it, then it doesn't necessarily pinpoint the children who might be having difficulty at home or financially have families that are financially stretched. But so you say no to this policy, that it's for some children essential but others not. Diane, thank you for your call.
I think you've also got an issue with the teachers here, right? Because the results showing us that sort of 40% of teachers or whatever have decided that they need to pay for their kids' breakfast.
Yeah.
That's great that the kid's not going hungry, but really it shouldn't be a teacher's job to pay for a hungry kid's breakfast, right?
It's coming out of the school's budget, and schools' budgets are
Just have like
tight
a giant
anyway.
fruit basket, like a basket of fruits and some, I don't know,
I think one of the things here is
tea that you can make.
Presumably the biggest cost here isn't necessarily going to be the actual food, it's going to be the staffing.
Yeah.
And I think one issue you've got with schools at the moment, I was listening to a podcast recently, very interesting, saying so the school day was designed when women were generally at home, right? So it starts at 9, ends at 3, and the idea was that then you'd have the woman to come pick up the child and take them home, etc. Now, it's very good that for a very long time we've had women in the workplace, but school hasn't really updated. And so what you end up doing is parents having to spend shed loads of money on childcare. So I think the idea that we sort of update the school system in the recognition that you now have both parents working or a single parent working is only a good thing.
So
Well, especially
how
if
would that
most
work?
parties are saying they want to get more people into the workforce.
No, I get that, but how would
Extending
that
the-
work in practice? Because there's still only
extending the school
24
day.
hours in a day.
Well, how that would work in practice is that you, as well as paying teachers to teach from 9 to 3, you also pay youth workers to sort of run clubs after school. I mean, more and more schools are doing
Are
this.
doing
you
it,
have
yeah.
to
But it's
pay
about
for them.
do we as a state decide that just as we've invested in school from 9 to 3, we also want to invest in clubs from 3 to 6
Well, that's kind
and
of,
from 8 to 9.
It kind of does happen. I mean, that's kind of a responsibility that's been delegated to like councils and like.
OK, I'm
Well,
going to
they've
go
got
back.
no- they've
I'm
got
going to
no
go
money
back
though.
to the calls because we're getting sort of derailed here. Noel from Glamorgan, we're focusing on free breakfast. I keep saying free meals. I mean free breakfast for all children. Is this a good idea? Worth investing?
Oh, hi. We live in Wales, and this is already a policy for primary school children. So we
Breakfast,
feed
is
our
it?
child before we go in, before we take him to school anyway. But we take him to breakfast club because it provides wraparound care in the morning. It means we get to drop him off an hour early, which helps around our work commitments.
And Noel, if your child's anything like mine, I'm sure they're having double breakfasts too.
Well, maybe, but I mean, I think what they have is just sort of mini cereal boxes and some fruit out and maybe some toast, I think. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, I mean, mate, if he gets a free snack as well, then that's not a bad thing.
Can I ask?
With regards to...
Can I ask very quickly? You're saying this is a policy in Wales. I didn't know that. Is it free? Yeah. Is it completely free to send your kids to in all schools across Wales?
Well, all primary schools I'm aware of. I'm not sure about secondary schools.
Yeah.
But definitely primary schools, yeah.
Okay, and what about Michael's suggestion that should be extended out so that you can cover the full working day?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are after-school clubs as well. You can book your child onto them. There's different activities. We send ours to Welsh Club, and they also have an activities one as well. That's a couple of times a week. They're free, but you can't always rely on them because it depends on staff availability. But there is paid after-school club as well.
Can I ask how
So we have that option if we need it.
Can I ask what your child's sort of approach to the breakfast club is? Are they sort of like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to go in an hour earlier? Or are they sort of really looking forward to hanging out with their friends before school starts?
It's a good question that he actually enjoys it, but our child generally enjoys school anyway. The school he goes to is really good. And he's never. We've had him from breakfast club, so we drop him off at 8 o'clock, and we've had him right through to an after-school club, and I've picked him up at about 5, sometimes 5:30, and he's fine. He's absolutely fine with it. He's, like you say, he's quite a sociable child. He enjoys mixing with other children. I can't say the same for every child, obviously. All children are different, aren't they? But
and if
in our case, never a problem with it.
If they didn't have that, do you think you or your partner would need to sort of reduce your working hours or pay loads of money for childcare?
Yeah, it would. It would have quite an impact. It's really handy.
That sounds like a win-win.
No, it sounds like you're living the dream there, and it's so nice to hear that your son's enjoying school as well. We often hear stories the other way round. No, thank you for your call. Quite uplifting. Alan from Glasgow, are you going to uplift our spirits as well, or are you going to go doom and gloom on us?
All I'm just going to say is I'm all for the policy of actually free breakfast for all primary kids. The main being because we're actually we're actually investing in children's future by ensuring they all have a breakfast, so they're properly alert and fed and concentrated for when they go into school. We at least know portion controls, so they're getting an appropriate portion control size for the breakfast. The breakfast isn't full of sugar and chocolate, etc.
Sort of sugary cereals. That kind of goes along with what Esther's saying as well. So part of this would be a health education in terms of what is a healthy breakfast, what is a good portion size. But Alan, that all sounds very well and good. We're in a cost of living crisis, budgets are tight, the government doesn't have the money to spend on public services, basic public services that we need, it would appear. Where are we getting the money for this, and can we actually afford it, especially if you're paying for, I keep saying Mick Jagger, but Mick Jagger's kids to have breakfast. It won't just be poorer families or middle-class families. Very wealthy families will be getting these as well.
It's like you said, there are people who depend on the household. There could be like two parents working working the household, whereby they're in high-earning jobs, but they've also got a lot of outgoings as well. So the belt's actually tightened with them as well. So it's just basically a way of leveling the playing field for everyone in the classroom, really.
It certainly would level the playing field for the start of the day anyway. Alan, thank you very much for your call. Thanks for all your calls on this.